So at this time, I would like to invite our live stream audience into our room to TS&E's Effective Supervision training. This training is part of our Better Nonprofit Management series, which is offered several times during the year. My name is Joanne Horgan. I am the co-practice leader for the HR practice at Third Sector New England. And behind me is my co-presenter and co-practice leader, Lynn Freundlich. We are happy to have you with us today. At this point, what we're going to do, I'm going to hand things over to Lynn, and she's going to walk you through a model of adaptive supervision.
Thank you, Joanne. Welcome, everybody. How's the mic? Everybody hear me? Excellent. Okay, so I want to walk you through a two-part model to help us think about how to be effective as adaptive supervisors. In the first part of the model, we're thinking about ourselves as supervisors, and you should feel free to follow along in your materials if you want. I see a number of you have them open. This is the first page in the adaptive supervision section. The idea here is that there are 4 supervisory styles, and that we each have a default, a style in which we're most comfortable, a preferred style, a style that comes most naturally to us, okay? One of those styles is being directive. And people who enjoy being directive supervisors really like to break tasks down into small pieces and demonstrate how to do each piece. Being very clear about expectations is important to directive supervisors. Directive supervisors are interested and concerned with kind of compliance and are we doing things the right way. So that's the first style. Second style is coaching. And coaches provide lots of feedback to staff on the process, how they're doing the work, and also on the outcome or the deliverable. Providing feedback, praise for good work is really important to coaching supervisors. And the thing that really distinguishes coaches is that they express confidence in staff's ability to do the work well. So let me give you an example. For many, many years, my partner was a soccer coach. And he coached little kids. If you've ever seen little kids play soccer, they run up, I see heads nodding, they run up and down the field, chasing the ball, many of them never even getting close to the ball. Well, there was a little girl on the soccer team named Rose. And every time Rose went in, she ran up and down with the crowd, chasing the ball, never getting a toe on it. And when it was time to come out, she would come out and she would stomp her foot and she would say, "Billy," that's my partner, "I didn't score." And each and every time he put her back in, he would say, "Rosie, this is it. I know you're going to do it. You can do it this time." And she'd go in, she'd run up and down the field and never touch the ball. I know. So what happened is the kids got older. Rose went off and played girls soccer. My partner Billy went off and coached boys soccer. That's what happens when they get older. And Rose actually became a really successful soccer player. She was on the varsity high school team. And she had to write a paper for an English class about an adult who made a difference in her life. And she wrote about Coach Billy, which was very sweet. But what she wrote was that when she stopped believing in herself, he still believed in her. And so I think that's a good illustration of coaching. The third style is facilitating. And facilitating supervisors like being a sounding board. They're less concerned with kind of making plans or figuring out themselves how people they supervise will get from point A to point B, but they want to kind of do that in a collaborative way. Facilitative supervisors are there as a sounding board when problems come up. They don't have to be the ones with the solutions, but they're part of the process of coming up with solutions. And they provide encouragement, they provide support, but they encourage independence. And delegating supervisors are supervisors who like giving broad goals and don't concern themselves with how people get from point A to point B. They give feedback on the outcome, not the process, and they encourage risk-taking and entrepreneurship. So think about that for a minute. I know that everybody does some of these things some of the time, but I want you to think about your default. What do you like the most? What's most natural to you? What do you really prefer? And I'm going to take a straw poll. Okay? No right answer. The right answer is really about that self-awareness. So who here really likes being directive, enjoys kind of showing people how to do work and breaking it into small pieces? I see hands. Excellent. You had your hand up first. What do you like about being directive? Great. So you like it yourself to receive supervision that way, where things are broken down into small pieces so that you don't have questions about whether you're doing things the right way. And so that's also the way you like to provide supervision. I think that's a really important point. Many of us provide supervision in the way that we prefer to receive it. So that's great. Thank you. Who are our coaches in the room? How about Mike, your hand on fairly quickly. What do you like about coaching? Great. So you really enjoy believing in people. That comes naturally to you, and that's an important piece of coaching. Excellent. Thanks. Who are facilitators? What do you like about facilitating? Great. That sounds very facilitative. So you kind of connect on that emotional or feeling place, and so you want to know how people are doing, not necessarily what they're doing. That's great. And those kinds of open-ended questions, tell me how you're doing, how are things going, are really hallmark of facilitators. Great. And who are our delegators? What do you like about delegating? Yeah. That's great. You made two very important points. One is that about that risk-taking, and that if people don't have the space to make mistakes and learn from them, they're not necessarily learning. And that's something that I think we aren't always comfortable with, allowing people to make mistakes. I mean, sometimes the stakes of making mistakes are too high, but in general, that is how people learn. If you think about small children learning, they stand up to walk and they fall down, and then they realize they need to be more balanced, and they try it again. So that's the same. Right. That makes a lot of sense. The other thing that you said is that you don't like to be micromanaged, and so you don't want to provide that kind of feedback, that kind of supervision as well. And that's similar to I don't see your name, I'm sorry, Bernadette, what Bernadette said about really wanting to provide supervision in the way that you like to receive it. I'm going to come back to the concept of micromanagement in a minute. So, good. Okay, so that's the first part of the model. Let's set that aside for a minute. And now we're going to think about the people we supervise. And the idea here is that we can break down the way someone approaches their work into 3 dimensions, into their ability, experience, and motivation. And so ability is the expertise that they bring to work, or the speed with which they can learn how to do something. Experience is, have they done this work before? Do they have transferable skills? And motivation is a combination of confidence and energy for the work. So here's how that might play out. In the job where my supervisor embarrassed me, which was a long time ago, also that she was my best supervisor, so it wasn't all bad. But in that job, one of the things that I did was facilitate volunteer orientations. And I facilitated 3 volunteer orientations a month, and I was in that job for 9 years. So you can do the math. It was a lot of volunteer orientations. And if you had asked me superficially, how are volunteer orientations going? My answer would have been great. I can do them in my sleep. The feedback I got is fine. Let's move on. But if I had paused and really thought about my approach to that part of my job on these 3 dimensions, what I would have realized is that my ability and my experience were very high. My motivation, can you guess? Yeah, I was bored. It was really, really low. And that would have been helpful information to have, just by taking that pause and thinking about that part of my job in this way. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But when you're doing this, when you're thinking about ability, experience, and motivation, you can actually rate them on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is low and 5 is high, and come up with an average, which then becomes a numerical indicator. So for me, volunteer orientations, my ability and experience were at a 5. My motivation, let's call it a 1, which means that my numerical indicator, the average of those numbers, was somewhere between a 3 and a 4. And the reason that you'd want to do that is that when you think about how staff approach a particular part of their job, and you combine that with the supervisory style part of the model, you get an indicator of what approach is going to be most useful in working with this staff person around this particular part of their job. So when someone's at a 1, you want to provide directive supervision. When they're at a 2, you want to coach. When they're at a 3, something between coaching and facilitating would be useful. 4, facilitating, and 5, delegating. So going back to that example of the volunteer orientations, rather than just delegating, which is what my supervisor was doing based on my assessment that things were going really well, if we had paused and broken that part of my job down, what we would have realized is that some combination of coaching and facilitating might have been really helpful. Coaching in that someone else pointing out, you're really good at this. I believe in you. This is an important part of your job. Might have kind of helped with my motivation. And some facilitating, thinking about how have I been doing it over these years? Have I tried mixing it up? Asking me open-ended questions to help me think more creatively about a piece of work that I didn't stop to think about very often. And so that's how you can look at your own style, think about what staff need, and then figure out how you need to adapt from one style to another in order to support your employees' success. I'm going to ask you what you think about that in a minute. I'm going to ask you what you think about that in a minute, but I am going to thank our live stream participants. We appreciate you being here at Third Sector New England's Effective Supervision Training, part of our Better Nonprofit Management series.